Brandon Aiyuk of the San Francisco 49ers. There's been this contract impasse throughout this offseason, and today officially is reported that Brandon Aiyuk has requested a trade from the San Francisco 49ers. There's a number of angles that we can go with this thing, whether this is feasible, what this would do to the Niners if he were to be traded, who would be a candidate to trade for Aiyuk. I'll let you go in any direction that you want to go, but the news of the day is Brandon Aiyuk unhappy with the contract as he has been throughout this offseason, but now officially requesting a trade.
Yeah, I had a couple things pop into my head immediately. The first one was Debo, right? Debo did this exact same thing 2 years ago. He is still a San Francisco 49er. So you got to remember, requesting a trade doesn't mean that you're going to see Aiyuk get moved. And Aiyuk is still under contract for this year for $14 million, and they have the ability to franchise tag him next year. So similar to what we saw with T. Higgins a couple years ago, where he's still got 2 years under contract with the Niners before he can move on to free agency. So there's not as much of urgency in the Niners organization to immediately move on from him. And then I immediately went to, okay, when were the last 2 big wide receivers we saw traded? That was A.J. Brown and Tyreek Hill. We saw Tyreek Hill go for a late first rounder, the 29th overall pick, the 50th pick, a second rounder, and then 2 fourths and a 6th. And we saw A.J. Brown go for the 18th overall pick and then a 4th rounder. So interesting kind of the pricing that it would take to get to Aiyuk. Now, you got to remember that the wide receiver market hadn't boomed as much when that had happened. So both those guys re-signed, Tyreek 4 for 120 and A.J. Brown 4 for 100. So you're seeing them get paid in that, $25, $26 million range a year. Well, Aiyuk wants Jefferson money, and Justin Jefferson just signed for $35 million a year, 4 for 140. So it's not only the question of, is someone willing to give up a first-round pick at this point when you don't know what that draft pick is, but also are they willing to sign him after giving up that much capital for that Justin Jefferson type money when we have not seen Justin Jefferson type numbers from Aiyuk. And so it's a tough situation for Aiyuk because I don't know who the immediate suitors are that are willing to step up and say, yeah, we're going to pay you $140 million over 4 years after giving up a ton of draft capital just to get you in the building.
Yeah, and this, to me, it feels like Brandon Aiyuk is kind of like at the 11th hour sort of trying to force the 49ers' hand here, because you hit the nail on the head. Like, nobody is raising their hand to pay the Justin Jefferson money. Now, Justin Jefferson, former Offensive Player of the Year, as dynamic a receiver as we have in the National Football League, probably outside of Tyreek Hill. So the Vikings went ahead and paid that because they went ahead and let Kirk Cousins go to free up some cap space because they wanted to start over at the quarterback position. They can fit that into their financial structure, but I don't think there's a lot of teams, especially a lot of contending teams, that are willing to pay Aiyuk this money. I mean, look at what's going on right now in Cincinnati and also in Dallas with CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase. Those teams right now are still trying to figure that out. It just goes to show you where the receiver market is, and I don't think teams were necessarily caught off guard with the Jefferson money, but they're just really apprehensive to wanting to pay that because, as we've seen throughout these NFL drafts over the last 5-6 years, there's a lot of really good receivers in college football. So do you really need to pay a guy $35+ million to be a number one wide receiver? Now, like, there's maybe 3 or 4 guys that fit that bill, but clearly the league is telling you and the 49ers are telling you that they don't value Aiyuk at that level. That doesn't mean they don't value him, because I do think they want to keep Brandon Aiyuk, which is why I don't think they're going to trade him, because they ultimately believe that they're a better football team with Brandon Aiyuk. You look at their numbers from a season ago. He had led the team in targets. He's Brock Purdy's favorite target, 105 targets, had almost 18 yards per catch last season, was all-pro second team. But I just think that they just got to find the right number. Diana Rossini from The Athletic is saying that there was an offer around $26 to $27 million, which is obviously significantly lower what Justin Jefferson got. But maybe they can get to 30 or something. But all I know is that right now, like, I wouldn't really be anticipating Brandon Aiyuk being on the move just based on the Niners wanting him. And I don't see anybody else out there wanting to pay him that Jefferson money.
Yeah, I mean, 26, 27 million is pretty good, Femi. I mean, if you think about it, Jefferson's getting 35, and you look at Aiyuk's numbers, yes, he's like, I want to make sure I preface this. I think Aiyuk is phenomenal. I think he is a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL. One of the craziest stats, at one point last year, he was averaging almost 2 yards of separation on man-to-man coverage and routes run. Wow. That's 6 feet of separation. You talk about fitting it into, a half a foot window in a lot of situations in the NFL. When you have 6 feet of window to throw it into, it makes it very, very easy for your quarterback. He's one of the top 3 route runners in the NFL. He's explosive with the ball after he catches it. I think he's a phenomenal talent. It's just hard to pay him that type of money when you're leaving Shanahan's offense. You're leaving an offense that's just loaded with weapons, so it makes it a little bit easier for you to be able to get open, and you're going to an unknown. And I thought you made a great point there as well. We go around and we look at the contenders. Miami, they don't have any cap space. Buffalo, no cap space. If you look at Dallas, they're strapped. They're not going to do anything. Philadelphia doesn't have any cap space. Like, The logical landing spots for Aiyuk if something does happen, is teams like Washington, is teams like Pittsburgh, is teams like New England, teams that are not going to give up their first-round pick next year. I mean, if you're Washington, New England, you have a very good chance at a top 5, top 10 pick. There's no chance you're willing to trade that for Aiyuk. So right then you have to reset the expectations if you're San Francisco on what you're getting back if you do find a team that is willing to pay him that has the cap space to actually take him on.
Yeah, I think this is a stalemate because the Niners, they value him, but they're not going to take like the 28th pick or a team that's contending that kind of a draft pick. They're going to want a number 1 pick from one of these teams that could fit him under the cap. And like you mentioned, it's these teams that are expected to not be that good in 2024. This news was reported by Mike Garafolo of NFL Network, and he said it was despite a recent meeting. So they reportedly met the Niners and Brandon Aiyuk. The Niners haven't been willing to engage in negotiations since May, so Aiyuk has respectfully asked out. Now, there are other reports out there from people around the Bay Area that are saying that the Niners gave Brandon Aiyuk permission to seek a trade prior to the NFL draft. Remember, we heard there were some rumblings about Aiyuk in Pittsburgh. I know Steelers fans have been clamoring for him throughout this offseason, saying, hey, go get Brandon Aiyuk. They gave him the permission to go and seek the trade. Clearly, the Niners didn't like whatever they brought back, if they brought back anything at all. So it's been out there for quite some time. This is just now making it public and him trying to probably force their hand before training camp reports next week. We'll see if he actually shows up to Niners training camp. He hasn't shown up to minicamp or any of the other offseason activities. But, I mean, the league is sitting there telling you they don't really want to match whatever the Niners are out there looking for or what they'd be willing to accept for giving up Brandon Aiyuk. So I think that we just sit here heading into training camp next week. Either he shows up and is pouting, or he doesn't show up and he's just accruing fines. He's going to accrue fines daily. And if I were Brandon Aiyuk's agent, I'd be like, bro, you can't be doing this. But I think his agent might be lost at sea as well. It doesn't seem like he really knows what he's up to, given the fact that they willingly gave up $160,000 missing mandatory minicamp. But all you have to do is show up and act like you have a hamstring, and you can avoid the fines.
Yeah, it's interesting because there was rumors number 17 from Jacksonville for Aiyuk. That one kind of fell through. There was rumors of Washington's second-round pick, high second-round pick. San Francisco said they wanted more than just that. So I don't see a deal in place. And training camp's going to be so interesting, Femi, because part of me says he just doesn't show up. But if he doesn't show up, it does no good to anybody. Again, he's under contract this year for $14 million. He's going to have to play, and not showing up, all it does is deteriorate your value in other people's eyes around the NFL. So it makes it harder for San Francisco to trade you for what they want to trade you for. The situations with T. Higgins in Cincinnati and with Aiyuk here in San Francisco, two teams that have 11-plus win totals, are just fascinating to me, because how much of a locker room issue are they both going to be? And it's not like we haven't seen Aiyuk willing to go to social media. He posted on his Instagram a call with Jaden Daniels of the Washington Commanders. He's posted on his Instagram, they don't want me. He has clearly been vocal through social media. This is going to be a problem for San Francisco, and that might actually be the linchpin of why they actually do eventually move him.
Yeah, if I was Brandon Aiyuk, or if I was advising Brandon Aiyuk, I'd say stop talking. Stop being on social media. Stop posting all this stuff here, because like you said, it feels like he's really taking this to heart, where it's, hey, this is just negotiations. This is how these things work. I mean, we sat here last year. Nick Bosa didn't get paid until the week before the regular season. The Niners, they do these deals deep into the summer. They're not doing these things before training camp. So I'll tell Aiyuk, maybe practice a little bit of patience if you want to go ahead and get paid. But clearly, he doesn't want to be patient about this. You've been in this situation before as a receiver, having to negotiate with the team. I mean, what is Aiyuk going through at this point, and what do you think ultimately happens between he and the Niners?
Yeah, I actually very familiar with this, and great to be with you, Mike and Femi. I mean, so I've negotiated with the family. You got Kyle, who's the head coach now, but Mike Shanahan was my head coach in Denver. So if it's anything like Mike in terms of their tactics and what they want to do and what they're all about, they don't want to pay multiple wide receivers a lot of money. We had Anthony Miller, certainly Shannon Sharp, myself, and, you're making a lot of money. And so they come to you and say, hey, look, can you renegotiate this? Can you do this? Can you do that to kind of help out the salary cap? They just have a certain number. They have a certain value that they put on that position. It's unfortunate for Aiyuk because he's in his prime and he feels like he's a premium player. It's unfortunate because San Francisco, they already have a premium player, and that's Debo. Debo did the same thing. He said, I want to trade, but they didn't trade him. They weren't going to trade him. Aiyuk could be different. This will be interesting. I know they said they're not entertaining any trades, but, that's also a negotiation tactic by San Francisco. If somebody comes off the top and says, look, we want Aiyuk is our number one guy, then I think San Francisco will look at entertaining that trade.
And it's going to be interesting to see what the market is like for him. The last two big trades, we saw Tyreek Hill go down to Miami. That was a late first rounder, mid second rounder, and 3 later draft picks. We saw A.J. Brown for the 18th overall in a later draft pick. It's hard to make that type of trade before the season starts, though, because you don't know what that draft pick is going to be. And the teams that have the cap space to go get him and want to make the number one pick, teams like Washington, teams like New England, they don't want to give up their pick right now. That could be a top 5, top 10 pick heading into next year's draft, and then it's not worth trading for someone like Aiyuk. So it's hard to find the landing spot for him as well. And I don't think that there's any argument he's worth more than the $14 million he's going to get paid this year. But the problem for him is that you've got that year at $14 million and the year after that where they can franchise him, and they really control his rights for the next 2 years. So be interested to see what he does. Do you think this could be a locker room issue for them? You mentioned Debo. He wasn't someone who went to social media consistently. We've seen Aiyuk go to social media multiple times during this process this summer. Do you think that could be a problem for San Francisco and actually be the linchpin and the reason they end up moving on from him?
It's possible. I think they all are about team, and certainly as a wide receiver, you have to be unselfish in that offense. You have to block. Certainly you're not going to get the rock thrown to you. You're not going to get that many attempts. And to make a case that you're a number one guy and you want 35 or 4 or 25, even 20 million a year, that's going to be difficult. I can relate to what I was saying about Aiyuk, Mike, in this regard. So you have to do something to move the needle. You're right. If you stand pat, they control you. Like you mentioned the franchise tag. They can do that if they wanted to, but if you really want the money that you feel like you're worth, you're going to have to do something. That could include holding out. That could include a lot of things. He already missed off-season training camp, and he got fined for that. I think it was over $100,000 already. So he's digging in. These things can go either way. But it's up to John Lynch, and certainly it's up to Kyle Shanahan to kind of smooth it over and make sure that the locker room is intact. But they drafted, they next man up mentality. They drafted a receiver, so it's incumbent upon Aiyuk to really establish himself and certainly have some type of strength if he can muster that up in terms of this negotiation.